Chapter 1. The Ashes of Thunder's Gate. Snow drifted down like the ashes of the dead. A pale silence smothered the once mighty halls of Karag Dronaz, the Thunder's Gate. What had once been a bastion of dwarfen might now lay as a corpse beneath the mountains. Stonework that had endured for centuries was broken and blackened. Pillars carved with runes of protection now lay cracked across the ground, toppled like felled warriors. The forges, those roaring hearts of the hold, were choked cold and silent, their chimneys cracked, pouring only dust into the frigid sky. From the rubble of the great hall, a hand emerged. Not just any hand, scarred, trembling, and wrapped in the blood-soaked leathers of battle. Fingers scraped through loose stone and ash before gripping a shattered beam. With a groan, deep, animal, and thick with agony, Thorek Grudgebound pulled himself free from the grave of his people. His skin was gray with dust and blood, his broad chest carved with fresh wounds, both shallow and deep. A jagged slice ran down his left shoulder, a goblin blade that had found its mark. His eyes, those flint-gray orbs, stared blankly into the smoke-hazed light above. For a moment he did not move. He only breathed. Then the memories came, like molten metal poured into his skull. Screams, the clang of iron, green laughter, his father Daenric roaring as he faced the Troll King in the Anvil Hall. The final hammerfall, the scream that had shaken the mountain, all gone. Thorek stumbled to his feet. His ochre-dyed beard, once meticulously braided, now hung wild and caked in gore. His head was bare, his scalp shaved clean, runes of oath and death tattooed across his skull, now streaked with blood. The axe of Daenric, his father's rune weapon, was half buried beside a fallen standard. Thorek staggered toward it, falling to his knees as he yanked it from the ground. The haft was splintered, sticky with black and red blood. The rune glow was faint, but it was still there, still alive. Just like him. He trudged through the wreckage of the inner gate, past the bodies of kin, their armor crushed, faces frozen in rage or fear. Some still clutched broken weapons, others had been torn in half by squigs or trampled beneath troll feet. One had been nailed to the wall by goblin spears in the shape of a crude rune. Thorek did not weep. Instead, he stripped off his helm and flung it into the dust. Then he stood before the ruined outer gate, the once proud threshold of Karag Dronaz. It had been cracked straight down the center, as though Grimnir himself had cleaved it in twain in fury. Thorek dropped to his knees. The wind howled through the pass, but he could still hear the last screams, still smell the blood and soot, still see his father's eyes, grim and proud as the warboss's blade struck. And then he spoke. It wasn't loud, it wasn't poetic, but it was final. Name this grudge. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled a battered iron chisel and a long, wickedly curved dagger. Despite the shaking of his hands and the burning in his lungs, he began to carve into the shattered gate itself. Each motion was deliberate, painful, a sacred act. Flakes of stone fell like snow as he inscribed the first rune. His own blood mixed with the dust as he dragged the blade through the surface. It took long minutes, but dwarves are patient, especially with hatred. And when it was done, the first word stood sharp and deep in the ancient stone. Gretch. Thorek rose again, blood trickling down his arms, staining the fur of the troll hide draped over his shoulders. He reached behind him and unhooked a small iron locket, the one that never left his neck. Inside were ashes, beard hairs, remnants of kin. He opened it, let the ashes fall at the gate, and then he turned to the horizon, eastward, toward where the Black Moon tribe had crawled into the world again. There were names to be written, blood to be spilled, an oath to fulfill, and the last son of Karag Dronaz would see it done, one dead goblin at a time. Chapter 2. Trail of the Black Moon. The wind through the mountain passes moaned like the ghosts of the dead. Days had passed since Thorek Grudgebound carved his first grudge into the stone of Karag Dronaz. The bitter winds of the grey mountains gnawed at his bare skin, but he welcomed the bite. He traveled light, as all slayers did. No food beyond jerky, no bedroll, no comforts. Only his axe, his oaths, and the scream of vengeance rattling somewhere behind his teeth. It was in the crumbling wreckage of a border outpost, once a dwarfen way station for traders crossing to Bretonia, that he first caught their scent. Smoke. Blood. Goblins. He crouched low behind a tangle of fallen timbers, the charred remains of the watchtower crackling behind him. The once proud stone walls had been blackened by fire, and a pair of dwarfen corpses, their armor stripped, faces chewed away, hung by their ankles from a shattered beam, like offerings to some foul god. Beneath the hanging bodies, goblins skittered like rats. There were at least a dozen, armed with rusted scimitars, spears, and wicked shortbows. One wore a crude iron helm shaped like a squig's gaping mouth. Another dragged a sack that mewled softly, likely a captive or something worse. And there, carved on a slab of hacked dwarf stone, was the symbol. The Black Moon, a crude crescent of filth and soot daubed in blood. The sight of it made Thorek's jaw tighten until his teeth ached. "Black Moon," he growled, the words more breath than voice. He did not wait. Thorek rose like a storm breaking the horizon and charged, a howl erupting from his throat, raw, primal, slayer-born. The goblins turned in panic, their high-pitched chatter dissolving into shrieks. The first fell before they even screamed. Thorek's axe cleaved through its torso, splitting ribs like dry bark, spraying gore in an arc across the frostbitten stones. He didn't pause. His muscles moved on their own, memory forged in fire and grief. A spear jabbed at him. He caught the shaft beneath his armpit, ripped it from the goblin's grasp, and slammed the butt into its face, crushing teeth and skull with a wet crunch. They came at him from all sides now, shrieking, frothing with desperate hatred. Thorek welcomed them. One leapt at him with twin knives. He turned, his axe sweeping in a low arc, severing both legs mid-air. The goblin hit the ground, howling, stumps pumping blood into the dirt. Another tried to flee. Thorek hurled his dagger, and it punched through the back of its neck, burying to the hilt. The goblin dropped like a stone. He took an arrow to the thigh, hissed, but kept coming. A goblin shaman, reeking of mushrooms and rot, raised a staff covered in squig skulls and chanted some foul curse. Sparks flew from its tip. Thorek didn't slow. He threw himself forward, shoulder first, and tackled the shaman into the dirt, pummeling its face into the stones with his bare fists until its jaw shattered and green teeth skittered across the floor. The last two tried to run. He let them. He stalked through the aftermath, blood steaming off his arms and chest. His beard clung wetly to his collarbone. The iron runes tied into it were now dark with ichor. He walked past the corpses, careful to crush each head beneath his boot, never leave a goblin with breath left in its lungs. Then, near the shaman's twitching remains, he found it. A torn map, partially soaked in blood, tucked into a crude leather satchel. Unrolling it, Thorek's eyes narrowed. Tribal glyphs marked a path winding southeast through the mountains, toward the old smuggler routes skirting the edge of the border princes. Scrawled in jagged goblin scratch were the symbols of several tribes, but the Black Moon sigil had been stamped in the largest, smeared in red wax and black soot. Something was happening. They were gathering again. Thorek clenched the map in his fists, his muscles trembling with rage and purpose. He tied the bloodied parchment to the haft of his axe like a war banner. Then, with the moaning wind at his back and the stink of goblin blood in his beard, he turned south, following the trail into the untamed wilds, where no king ruled, and only the axe spoke true. His hunt had begun. Chapter 3. Fang Pass. The storm came without warning. One moment, the wind whispered through the pine-choked slopes of the Grey Teeth Mountains. The next, it screamed, a wailing gale that bent trees and flung ice like razors. Thunder cracked the sky in jagged bursts. Slate-colored clouds choked the peaks above, and snow churned underfoot into slush and blood. Fang Pass, an ancient smuggler's trail carved into the bones of the mountain, was a death trap even in calm weather. Sheer cliffs dropped hundreds of feet on either side, the path barely wide enough for two dwarfs abreast. The stones were slick with moss, and somewhere in the distance, something roared. Thorek Grudgebound didn't flinch. He trudged forward through the storm, the rune axe of Daenric strapped across his back, troll-hide pelt snapping in the wind. His muscles ached, his wounds itched. Every breath was mist and fire, but he walked on. Because something was watching him. Then he saw them. Eyes in the mist, dozens, low to the ground. Hungry. Squigs. The first one bounded from the snow like a cannonball of teeth and muscle, a ball of fanged rage, red as fresh meat, its mouth easily half its mass. Its rider, a cackling goblin clad in bone armor, howled with delight as it launched toward Thorek. Thorek met it with steel. His axe came up just as the squig lunged, the blade buried deep in its gaping maw, severing its jaw in a spray of ichor. The beast spasmed mid-air, its rider flung screaming into the gorge. Another squig snapped at his leg. He pivoted and brought the axe down like a thunderbolt, cleaving through skull and spine in one brutal arc. It died twitching, jaw still chomping. More came. From the cliffs above and the snowdrifts below, squig riders swarmed, hooting and shrieking, flinging spears tipped in bone and rusted metal. One pierced Thorek's shoulder. He roared and ripped it out bare-handed, blood gushing down his arm. The path turned slick. He slipped, rolled, crashed into a drift as another squig lunged. Its teeth scraped against his bracers, snapping inches from his face. He jammed his axe up under its belly and eviscerated it from gut to throat, warm organs pouring onto his chest like slop from a broken barrel. Then the ground trembled. It wasn't thunder. It was something heavier. A roar broke through the storm like a landslide, and from the white gloom emerged a troll, massive, lumbering, pale as grave rot, its flesh stitched with scars and brands. Heavy iron shackles clanked around its wrists, its back marked with whip scars. Eyes burned with berserker madness and raw pain. An enslaved cave troll, but this one had been altered, broken, weaponized. It charged. The impact shook the pass. Thorek barely avoided being flattened as the troll smashed through a granite outcrop, stones exploding in every direction. He rolled, came up hacking, but the troll was fast, too fast. A club, made from a splintered tree trunk wrapped in iron, came down. Thorek caught it on his bracers and was hurled back like a broken doll, smashing into the cliff wall with a sickening crunch. Ribs cracked. Blood filled his mouth. Still he stood. "Come on, then," he spat, voice like gravel in rage. "Come and die." The troll roared and charged again. Thorek met it head-on. He ducked beneath a swing, slammed the axe into its knee, and felt the joint give with a wet pop. The beast bellowed, collapsing to one side. Thorek scrambled up its torso, axe flashing in a blur of runes and steel, hacking into its throat, over and over, until black blood sprayed in jets, and the troll's final breath gurgled in its ruined neck. It collapsed, and the pass went still. Around him, squigs fled into the storm, riderless and yelping. Goblin corpses lay scattered, blood seeping into the snow like ink in water. Thorek stood atop the twitching corpse of the troll, chest heaving, body trembling. Then, from the heart of the storm, drums. Distant, deep, rhythmic, not thunder, not imagination. He turned, eyes narrowing. And the vision struck. The storm vanished, and he stood in the great hall of Karag Dronaz, flames dancing across the walls, casting the stonework in hues of gold and crimson. But the flames grew brighter. Two screams echoed. Stone cracked. The hall fell. He saw his father again, axe in hand, face calm, lips moving in silent prayer. Then the fire took him, too. Thorek snapped back to reality, blinking hard. The storm still howled. The blood still steamed on his chest. The troll was still dead. But the vision clung to him, a phantom scent of smoke, a whisper of a scream, a tremor in his hands. He bent down, tore a strip of hide from the troll's back, and tied it around his belt. A trophy. Not for glory, not for song, but for the Book of Grudges. Chapter 4. Karag Dronaz reclaimed. The sun barely pierced the gray fog as Karag Dronaz came into view, a forgotten wound in the mountainside, hidden behind decades of overgrowth and snow-choked scree. The stone gate was half collapsed, blackened with soot and covered in claw marks. What once stood proud with statues of kings now bore only the wind and silence. Thorek Grudgebound stood at the precipice, axe across his back, troll-hide pelt flapping in the cold wind. He said nothing. Beside him stood a ragged band of fortune-seekers and grave-walkers, a scabbed-together company of the desperate and damned. Sorrowdeep, a Thailand duelist with hollow eyes and a curved saber, her left hand wrapped in bandages, hiding something that writhed beneath. Ulrich Stoneborn, an exiled runesmith with burnt runes carved into his arms, cast out for heresies whispered in the dark. Varas the Pale, a human necromancer in a wolfskin cloak who claimed he was here to study echoes, and two Karagnorn beardlings, fresh-faced and filled with vengeance, clenching axes too large for their hands. They had come seeking relics, gold, runes, secrets buried deep. Thorek had come for something else. They crossed the threshold into the cold dark. Their lanterns hissed. The tunnels bled silence and the smell of long dead things. The once glorious stonework of Karag Dronaz had been ravaged. Carvings defaced, braziers toppled, the banners of old torn and scorched. "Something sleeps here," Ulrich whispered. He was wrong. Nothing slept. The first attack came as they entered the outer forge chambers. The runes on the door pulsed red, and from the stone itself, shapes emerged. Warriors carved of ash and hate. Dwarf ghosts clad in spectral armor, their eyes glowing with furnace fire. Cursed ancestors. Their faces were twisted in grief and fury, brothers who had died defending the hold, souls bound to failed oaths. One charged. A beardling screamed as the spirit's axe cleaved through his helm, not steel, but soul, burning through bone and flesh like wildfire. He dropped, convulsing, eyes melted from his skull. Sorrowdeep lunged at another, only for her saber to pass clean through. The spirit grabbed her wrist and wrenched her shoulder from its socket, bone cracking like brittle wood. Thorek surged forward. "Stand, you cowards!" he roared, voice like a landslide. "Stand and be seen!" He met the nearest ghost head-on, its spectral blade sliced across his chest, burning like acid, but he took it, roared through the pain, and brought his rune axe down with all the wrath of Karag Dronaz behind it. The spirit shrieked as the rune edge struck. It tore through ghost flesh, unraveling its form in a spray of light and dust. Ulrich began chanting, runes glowing along his arms. He slammed his hand to the floor, and a burst of rune fire exploded, scattering several spirits back into the walls. But the forge ahead howled. The final chamber yawned open like the maw of the mountain. Inside, broken anvils lay in ruin, and the forge heart itself smoldered, a dead star coughing smoke and ancient rage. And there, half buried in rubble, lay a jagged shard of blackened stone veined with faint glowing sigils, a piece of the anvil of Dronaz. Thorek stepped forward. The moment he touched it, the chamber groaned. A final guardian rose from the forge smoke, a dwarfen spirit larger than the others, its beard braided in gold flame, its eyes twin coals of endless fury. It carried no axe, but a hammer made of burning runes, and it pointed directly at Thorek. "You carry the blood of oathbreakers," it thundered. "You come to steal what you failed to protect." Thorek dropped to one knee, blood pouring from reopened wounds, and growled, "I am Thorek Grudgebound, last of Karag Dronaz. I bear my father's axe. I bear my clan's shame. But I do not steal." He held the shard high, as if offering it to the dead. "I swear to return this to its rightful place, to the halls you burned for. I swear by beard and blood. May Grimnir strike me down if I fail." A long silence. Then the spirit looked down, and slowly his hammer dimmed. The others watched, hushed, barely breathing. The guardian stepped back and lowered his head. And then he vanished. The forge went dark. Only Thorek remained standing. The rest of the company limped out, bloodied, silent, changed. One beardling was dead, and Sorrowdeep had lost her sword hand. Varys muttered about how even ghosts fear true oaths. But Thorek? He held the shard, cradled in cloth and blood, and etched one more line into the iron plate strapped to his back. Khazad Gromar, grudge paid, relic reclaimed. But as he slept that night, visions plagued him again. Burning halls, Dronaz screaming, drums beneath the mountains, the dead calling his name in voices that cracked stone. The anvil shard pulsed with heat beside him, and the grudge still burned. Chapter 5. The Slayer's Test. The high winds of Mount Asgrindel tore across the cliff face like blades, whispering through snow-laced crags, slicing between stone cairns where bones had long since turned to dust. It was here, in a place where no dwarf was buried unless he died well, that the path of vengeance led Thorek once more. And here another slayer waited. The Hall of Last Oaths was little more than a cave temple carved into the side of the peak. Runestones circled its entrance like silent judges, each bearing the name of a dwarf who had died in battle, weapon in hand, oath fulfilled. There were hundreds, thousands. Thorek stepped into the dim chamber, his axe strapped to his back, anvil shards slung across his shoulder in a leather wrap, the scent of burnt troll hide still clinging to him. His beard, wild and thick, was stiff with dried blood. His torso bore fresh scars, still uncleaned, angry and red. The fire at the heart of the chamber crackled weakly, casting flickers across stone walls etched with sacred runes. And before that fire stood a slayer priest. His name was Gorgrim Runvine, a mountain of a dwarf even in old age. His beard was bound in intricate knots of crimson thread, and across his chest were tattoos of oaths so old they predated even the fall of 8 peaks. His eyes glimmered with flame and suspicion. "You reek of fury, but not of clarity," he growled, voice like an avalanche in a deep mine. "You walk the line between oath and madness, Thorek Grudgebound, and I will not see the Slayer cult made into a hound of vengeance." Thorek did not blink, did not flinch. "I walk where they died," he said simply. "That's all." Gorgrim unsheathed a ritual grey axe, twin-headed and ringed with flame-scorched runes. "Then you'll prove it. Here, now, in Grimnir's sight." The fire roared higher. The chamber darkened. The Slayer's test had begun. They circled slowly, bare-chested in the firelight, each dwarf a canvas of old wounds and fresh scars. No armor, no prayers, only blood. Gorgrim struck first. His axe came in fast and low, and Thorek caught it with the haft of Daenric's axe, sparks flying as metal screamed against metal. The impact nearly dislocated his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, twisted, and rammed a knee into Gorgrim's gut. The priest barely grunted. He answered with a headbutt that split Thorek's brow open like a ripe fruit. Blood ran down his face. Thorek grinned. They clashed again, axe to axe, blow for blow, each strike echoing like thunder in the chamber. Gorgrim was a veteran, his strikes honed by ritual and war, but Thorek fought like a beast fueled by ghosts. He ducked a swing, brought the axe around, and chopped into Gorgrim's thigh, flesh tearing open, muscle shredding beneath steel. The priest stumbled, cursed, and retaliated with a savage backhand that split Thorek's lip clean through. Both staggered. Neither gave ground. Then Gorgrim roared, a battle cry that shook dust from the ceiling, and charged, hammering down blow after blow in a storm of sacred fury. Thorek blocked once, twice. On the third strike he let it connect, took the blade across his shoulder, felt it dig deep. But as Gorgrim committed, Thor twisted, slammed his fist into the priest's jaw, and drove the butt of his axe into the older dwarf's ribs, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing into the stone altar. Silence followed. Gorgrim groaned, blood drooling from his mouth. Thorek stood over him, axe raised. But he didn't strike. Instead, he knelt. "I've no grudge with you, priest," he rasped. "Not yet." He lowered the axe. Gorgrim laughed, a deep coughing sound, painful and hoarse. "You've got iron in you, Grudgebound, and I see it now, not madness, grief, righteous, ugly, sharp." He sat up slowly, wiping his chin. "You've passed. You are still of us." They shared a flask of bitter dark ale by the fire as Gorgrim dressed the wound on his leg. Then the old priest leaned close. "There's word," he whispered, "from the south, near the black vault of Sorrowdeep." Thorek turned sharply. That name again, always that cursed place. Goblins, thousands, tribes uniting under a new banner, a moon with fangs. The words made Thorek's jaw tighten until it ached. "And a whisper of their war boss," Gorgrim added. "A name they dare not say, but one they chant in the dark. The Fang." Thorek said nothing, only stood, only stared into the fire. Then, without another word, he lifted his axe, slung the shard of the anvil across his back, and walked into the night. The storm had passed, but the wind still carried the scent of war, and Thorek Grudgebound walked straight into it. Chapter 6. Into Sorrowdeep. The black vault of Sorrowdeep was not a place whispered about in taverns. It had no songs, no maps, only warnings scrawled in ancient runes or spat by old dwarfs in their final drink. "Leave that place to the dead, it hungers still." But Thorek Grudgebound did not care. He had followed the trail for weeks, through ruined keeps, burnt caravans, and goblin-haunted woods. The Black Moon banner rose more boldly now, daubed in blood and ash on every rock, every gutted corpse. And all signs pointed south, towards Sorrowdeep, a dwarfen vault long swallowed by the mountain after the time of woes. Now it had been dug open again. He was not alone. 4 other slayers traveled with him, none younger than 90, none sane in the way men understand. All had sworn their own oaths, all bore the same wild ochre beards and bare, scar-twisted torsos. They didn't speak often, but they knew Thorek, knew the name Grudgebound, and they followed. The descent into Sorrowdeep was like crawling down the throat of a corpse. The air grew colder, fouler, the deeper they went, wet with rot, tinged with copper and sulfur. Ancient dwarfen architecture surrounded them, half collapsed and overtaken by fungus and bone. Lanterns flickered in the gloom, casting long shadows down halls carved with forgotten names. And then came the whispers. Soft, guttural clicks and wet giggles. Goblin voices, but wrong. Twisted. The first attack came without warning. A shaft of obsidian bone impaled the youngest slayer through the eye. He didn't scream, he simply fell, axe still clenched in his hands. From the walls and cracks they emerged, shamanic goblins twisted with necrotic runes, their skin blistered, their teeth sharpened with ritual filings. Their magic was vile. One raised a staff made from dwarf spine and vomited green fire across the hall. It consumed one of the slayers entirely, his silhouette writhing in the blaze until only charred bones remained. Thorek answered with steel. He launched into them like a cannonball, his axe carving through goblin flesh, spraying ichor across the stone. One shaman screamed a curse in some dark tongue. Thorek met it with a roar and buried his axe in its neck, snapping its staff in half as it fell twitching. But the worst was yet to come. In the central vault chamber, the ritual was underway. A vast circle of bones surrounded a dais carved from the broken remains of dwarfen altars. Black candles burned with green flame, and in the center stood a goblin necro-shaman, taller than the rest, his skull painted white, draped in robes of flayed squig-heap. He held aloft a skull. Thorek froze. He knew it instantly. The iron teeth grafted to the jaw, the deep rune etched into the crown. It was Daenric's skull. His father's skull, desecrated, enchanted, made into a vessel for their foul gods. Something inside Thorek snapped. He charged with a howl that turned marrow cold. The shaman shrieked, unleashing a wave of necrotic wind that blasted the other slayers back. One was flung into a wall with such force, his spine erupted from his chest. But Thorek kept coming. The goblin swung a blade carved from obsidian, but Thorek caught the blow on his bracer and drove his forehead into the shaman's nose, breaking it with a sickening crunch. He grabbed his father's skull with one hand, swung his axe with the other, and split the shaman clean in half, from skull to groin. The goblin's intestines spilled like rotted ropes, black smoke hissing from the corpse. Thorek fell to his knees, clutching the skull, weeping without sound. The others stood around him, battered, silent. The flame dimmed. Then the runes on his axe began to glow. Faint, flickering, he unwrapped the shard of the anvil of Dronaz from his back. Ulrich Stoneborn, the mad runesmith, limped forward, eyes wide with awe. "Here? Now?" he whispered. Thorek nodded. They placed the axe upon the anvil shard. Ulrich chanted in tongues only dwarfs dream in. The other slayers knelt, and Thorek, bleeding and broken, placed his father's skull atop the forged stone. He whispered a final rite, and the runes ignited. The flames surged, not red, but deep blue, the fire of ancestors, fed by oath and vengeance. The axe glowed like a star, cracks sealed, edges sharpened. The haft burned clean of blood and pain, and was wrapped anew in chains of molten iron. When it was done, Thorek's eyes gleamed with Rhinelight. He lifted the reforged weapon, not for glory, not for triumph, but for the grudge. Chapter 7. Mortasag stirs. The ground beneath Sorrowdeep was no longer still. The stone throbbed, pulsing with heat and malice. Each heartbeat of the mountain echoed like the slow breath of something immense and buried, something waking. "Morkoth Garg," whispered Ulrich, his burned runes quivering. "The troll god. An ancient hunger given flesh. They seek to make him more than myth." Thorek Grudgebound tightened his grip on the newly reforged axe of Daenric, its runes flickering like blue fire across its blood-darkened edge. Around him, the surviving slayers prepared for a final march, broken, battered, eyes hollow, but burning with death lust. "Then we kill it," Thorek growled, "or die well trying." The descent to madness. They followed the stench, down deeper halls lined with rotting bones and fungi that pulsed with their own sick light. The air was thick with chanting, guttural goblin voices rising in frenzied rhythm, echoing down the passageways. When they reached the ritual vault, they saw it. A cavern the size of a keep, its ceiling lost to darkness, its floor a churning mass of goblins, squigs, and cultists. At the center stood a crater, black and oozing, surrounded by stones carved with the black moon's sigil, glowing green with sorcerous filth. From the pit, a limb emerged, gray and bloated, tipped with claws like boulders. It twitched. Then another. Mortasag, the slumbering troll god, was stirring. The cultists screamed louder. The black moon rises. God, God, God. Thorek didn't wake. He let out a roar that shattered the tension like a war horn, and charged into the sea of madness, his fellow slayers at his heels. The descent became a massacre. The blood flood. The first wave was a tide of fanatics and squig-hoppers, goblins frothing with madness, high on shroom dust and zeal. One hurled a jar of green fire. Thorek kicked it back into his face, incinerating the fool and three more behind him in a burst of screaming flames. A massive squig bounded toward them, fangs wide enough to crush stone. Thorek leapt, drove his axe between its eyes and rode it down as it crashed into its kin, limbs flailing, blood geysering in every direction. Ulrich burned runes into the floor, melting a swarm of goblins into slag, while Seretta, bloodied and one-armed, danced through the chaos with a broken spear, stabbing throats and eyes with precise fury. A goblin shaman raised a staff. Thorek hacked through both the staff and the shaman in one blow, splitting him down the middle, entrails hissing in the ritual fire. But the cult wasn't done. From the far end of the pit, drums thundered. The crowd parted, and from the shadows came Gragrot Beastbelly, second in command of the Black Moon tribe. A squig beastmaster so massive he towered over ogres, his belly covered in stitched hides, his back bristling with squig harnesses and goblin bones. His face was half metal, a jagged iron plate bolted to his skull, in one hand a triple-flanged whip, in the other a massive cleaver, still wet from feeding. And beside him, a war squig the size of a house, black-nailed and frothing, armored in scrap and chain. Gragrot grinned. "You the one they call Grudge Boy?" He spat on the stone. "Good. I've been waiting." The duel in the deep. The squig lunged, a roaring wall of teeth and chain. Thorek dived beneath it, rolled to his feet, and hurled a throwing axe, embedding it in the beast's side. It squealed and spun, crushing goblins as it flailed. Gragrot charged, cleaver swinging down like a guillotine. Thorn caught the strike with his axe, but the force nearly broke his arm, sending him skidding across the gore-slick stone. He came up, panting, bleeding, grinning. The fight began in earnest. Blow for blow. Iron against bone. The cleaver slammed into Thorek's thigh, bit deep, severing muscle. He roared, swept low, and buried his axe into Gragrot's knee, splitting armor and shattering bone. They fell together, clawing and howling. Gragrot lashed his whip, caught Thorek around the neck, began choking him, dragging him closer. "I'll make your skull into a goblet," the Beastmaster hissed. Thorek gurgled. Then, with a final growl of rage, he wrenched the axe free, twisted his body, and rammed the blade into Gragrot's stomach, not once, but 3 times, each strike deeper than the last. "This is for Daenric." With a final roar, he hacked upwards, splitting the beastmaster open from gut to throat. Gore sprayed in sheets. Gragrot's eyes went wide, then dim as he collapsed into the pit, screaming his last breath into the blood-slicked dirt. The war squag wailed and fled into the darkness. The battle still raged around them, but the tide turned. The goblins broke, fled, trampled each other. And from the pit, Morkoth Guard roared again. One eye, massive, putrid, ancient, opened. And Thorek knew. They'd only delayed the end. Chapter 8. The Wrath of Thunder's Son. The walls trembled with each breath of the slumbering god. Deep in the rotting core beneath the vault, the Chamber of Awakening was alive with madness. Runes scrawled in blood and bile pulsed along the walls, forming an unholy circle around a gigantic fleshy pit, its center pulsing with veins, bile, and rot. The half-born form of Morkoth Garg, the troll god, twitched inside, encased in a membrane of mucus and stone flesh. It had a mouth, wide and gaping, lined with jagged teeth the size of dwarfs. It had one eye, open now, staring. Thorek limped through the gore-slick tunnel toward the heart, his beard stained with blood, body shredded with wounds. His shoulder had been cracked in the duel with Gragrot. His ribs ached with every breath. One eye was half-blinded by a slash across his brow. But the axe in his hands burned brighter than ever, the runes on its edge glowing like the forge fires of his ancestors. He was alone now. The slayers had died buying him time, buying him this moment. And at the center of the ritual, standing before a stone plinth inscribed with Squigtu runes and bound dwarfen bones, stood him, Skarsnik's Fang. The warboss was tall for a goblin, gaunt and wiry, cloaked in squig hides stitched with teeth and dwarfen braids. His face was a mask of iron bolted into his flesh, one eye red and glowing, the other swollen with fungal rot. His weapon was a poleaxe longer than he was, made from a reforged dwarf halberd and a squigjaw. His shield, a slab of petrified trollface. He turned as Thorek approached, his voice a hiss of contempt. "So, the beardling comes." Thorek said nothing, only stared, only burned. The clash. They met with the scream of steel and the roar of gods. Thorek struck first, a cleave meant to split the goblin in two, but Skarsnik's Fang moved with inhuman speed, parrying and lunging. His poleaxe flashed, carving across Thorek's chest and opening fresh meat. Thorek staggered. The pain was lightning in his veins, but he retaliated, swinging low and catching the warboss in the hip. Blood sprayed. Fang shrieked, leapt backward, and hurled a dagger tipped with green venom. It buried in Thorek's side. He howled. Still he fought. Again and again they clashed, blade on blade, wound for wound, breath for breath. The warboss fought like a shadow, fast and cruel. Thorek like a storm, heavy and relentless. But slowly the goblin gained ground. He was faster, younger, uninjured. Thorek bled from a dozen wounds. His arms shook with each swing. His knees threatened to buckle. But in his chest, his father's voice whispered, "Not yet, lad. Not until the grudge is paid." The trap. Thorek backed toward the pit's edge, where bile and flesh churned, and where he'd buried the charges. Earlier, before the duel, he'd found the collapsed tunnel, an old dwarfen excavation chamber packed with barrels of volatile black powder, likely meant for mining. With Ulrich's dying words, they'd rigged them with ancient rune fuses. One strike would detonate it all. Enough to collapse the ritual chamber, maybe even bury the god. Fang followed, laughing now, tasting victory. He raised his poleaxe. "Any last words, Oathkeeper?" Thorek spat blood. Grudge paid. He fell backward, onto the fuse trigger. The runes beneath his feet flared with red light. Gramel Vengas. The explosion was instant. A thunderclap of flame and stone, The floor buckled. The pit erupted in a geyser of bile, fire, and blood. Troll flesh and goblin screams filled the air. The roof caved inward, crushing fang-bearing statues and shamanic glyphs alike. Skarsnik's Fang screamed as the blast hurled him into the chasm, his form swallowed by the collapsing mouth of Mortasag. The god shuddered, roared, and began to collapse. The ritual was broken, the womb shattered, the soul unbound. Mortasag screamed once, a sound like mountains crumbling, then imploded, sucking in bile and gore before sinking into silence. The aftermath. Thorek crawled from the ruin, face blackened, armor in tatters. His axe was still in his hand, glowing faintly. His body screamed, blood poured freely. But he lived. The mountain shuddered, then stilled. Silence fell over Sorrowdeep. Thorek sat beside the collapsed pit, surrounded by the dead and the dying. Goblins fled into tunnels. The war boss was gone. But the grudge? The grudge was paid. For now. Chapter 9. Rise from Ruin. He awoke half-dead and choking on blood. The world above was a blur of firelight and shadows, pain screaming from every inch of his body. The taste of ash and bile filled his mouth, and his lungs burned with every breath. His left eye wouldn't open. His ribs were shattered. His legs refused to move. But he lived. That was the curse. He was being dragged. Thorek Grudgebound, son of Daenric, last of Karag Dronaz, slayer of the Black Vault, dragged through rubble like a sack of broken meat. Strong arms under his shoulders, beard tangled with his own. It was Kargan Ironjaw, the last of the slayers who'd survived the ritual chamber. The older dwarf's face was burned, one eye missing, his beard scorched down to his chest. But his grip was iron. "You'll not die here, lad," Kargan growled, hoarse from smoke. "Not when the gods turn their eyes." They moved through blackened halls, half collapsed, bones littering the floor like snowdrifts. The stench of burnt goblin flesh was thick and cloying, coating everything with the scent of spoiled meat and sour mushrooms. They passed the dead. So many dead. One slayer had been crushed beneath a fallen obsidian pillar, his arms still raised in defiance, axe embedded in the neck of a bloated goblin chief. Another lay twisted, mouth wide in a silent scream, his heart ripped out in some dark rite. But Thorek was silent. His mind burned with one truth. The Fang's corpse was never found. They emerged into cold daylight 3 days later. The ruins of Sorrowdeep belched smoke from its collapsed entrance. Black moon banners hung in tatters. Vultures circled. Thorek could barely walk. His body was a ruin, half his beard burned away, skin blistered, bones cracked. The rune axe was lashed to his back, its glow now a sullen ember, as if mourning. Kargan and 2 others, the only survivors, lit a pyre of dead before they left. 1,000 goblin corpses, dozens of dwarfs, burned together, cleansed by fire. Thorek stood with one arm in a sling, leaning on a shattered shield. His eyes never left the smoke as it curled into the sky. "The Fang?" Kargan asked, voice low. Thorek shook his head slowly. "Who fell, but no corpse, no bones, no blood." Kargan grunted. Then the grudge. Thorek reached behind him, pulling the battered iron plate from his back. With fingers wrapped in bandage and grime, he scratched a new line beneath the last etched name. Skarsnik's Fang. Fate unknown. Vengeance unfulfilled. He stared at the mark for a long time, then closed the plate and slung it over his back once more. That night, as the stars blinked cold in the mountain sky, Thorek sat alone by the embers of the pyre, the wind howling like a memory. In his palm, he held a small, cracked iron locket. Inside, the ashes and beard hairs of his kin. He opened it, touched the ash, let a few flakes drift into the fire. "Not yet," he whispered to them. But soon. The warband moved east the next day, toward Karag Dronaz, toward home. Thorek walked at the rear, limping, eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him, the black vault collapsed with a thunderous groan, as if trying to bury its sins. But the fire in Thorek's chest still burned. The Fang was out there, somewhere, and Thorek Grudgebound was not done. Chapter 10. The Long Grudge. The wind at the gates of Karag Dronaz carried the scent of old smoke and stone dust, haunting echoes from a fire long gone cold. It had taken Thorek weeks to return. His wounds still festered. His ribs were bound in oiled linen. A deep limp haunted every step. But he did not stop. The road to his fallen hold was carved not in miles, but in names, scars, and silence. And in his pack, wrapped in worn leather and bound with prayer wire, was the shard of the anvil of Dronaz, a fragment of the legacy he'd sworn never to forget. He arrived at dusk. The mountain loomed like a tomb, swallowing the sun in its jagged teeth. The entrance to the hold, once adorned with proud statues of high kings and shield thanes, was now a broken maw, its runes scorched, its stone blackened. Thorek passed beneath it in silence. The halls were dark, cold, choked with rubble and bones. He walked with only his axe, as light, the runes still pulsing faintly, as if remembering their forge-born origin. His boots crunched across shattered goblin skulls and rusted armor. The scent of blood never truly left this place, no matter the wind. At last he reached the Anvil Hall, once a grand sanctuary of fire and song, now a broken cathedral of ash. The anvil itself, split clean down the middle during the siege, still rested upon its dais, silent and shattered, its base scorched with black ruins of destruction. Thorek approached with reverence. He knelt before the dais, slowly unwrapping the shard, hands trembling not with fear, but with memory. The piece was heavy, dark iron flecked with glimmers of gold vein, the rune still etched into its skin, faintly glowing as it neared its mother stone. He didn't place it to restore. He laid it down in front of the broken anvil, like an offering, not to rebuild, but to remind. This was not closure. This was a marker, a warning. "I did not fail you," he whispered into the emptiness. "But I am not done." He stood, spine cracking, knees screaming, and walked to the cracked wall near the gate, the same stone he'd carved that first word so long ago. His first act as a slayer. Now came the next. He pulled the iron book from his back, its cover dented and blackened, pages of beaten metal etched with the names of the damned and the fallen. He drew his chisel, the dagger worn smooth from years of grudge carving. And beneath all the lines, beneath Black Moon Tribe Paid, beneath Thorek Grudgebound, Avenge Begun, beneath dozens of others, he carved a new name. Each letter deep, precise, unyielding. Skarsnik's Fang, oath unfulfilled. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the book. Outside, the wind had changed. The stars above Karag Dronaz burned bright and cold. Thorek stood at the gates once more, troll-hide cloak flapping in the mountain wind, the axe of his father slung over his shoulder, the iron plate tight against his back. His eyes scanned the eastern horizon, where rumors stirred of war bands rising again, of greenskin banners flying over the border princes, of black moons daubed in blood and fire. He did not smile. He did not weep. He only whispered, "I'm coming," and he began to walk. The grudge was long. The oath still burned, and Thorek Grudgebound was not done.